Hello, welcome. It's episode 170 of Grow Yourself Up, and I am back after an unscheduled break of 2 weeks. So I'll tell you what happened. It was a week where my husband was going traveling, so he travels quite a lot for work, and we took him, and my girls and I took him to the station because he had his little suitcase to pull along. So we dropped him at the station to get the train to work. And we literally walked back into our kitchen after we just dropped him, and there was water dripping on our kitchen floor. My daughter was like, "What's this?" And I was like, "Oh, my shattered nerves." And then there was water dripping from the ceiling. And I was like, "Oh my God." My husband has just left, or Carl has just left, and now we come home and we've got this. And I was like, "What is going on? Is this a leak?" It's been still a little bit chilly. And so I had turned on the heating that morning to warm the house a bit, because even though it's spring, it's been bizarrely windy where we live and kind of cold. And especially in the mornings. And so I turned on the heating, and then I was like, and it wasn't where the shower, on the floor up was. I was like, could it be the shower? But it was in the morning, and I had to get them to school. But I was like, you cannot make this up. Why does the other adult have to leave? And now I've got to grapple with all these bloody household issues. Anyway, excuse my language, but one of those type of things honestly just make me want to lie down on the floor and cry and kick my legs, because I think when I can't understand something, or I don't have the ability to fix it. I find it really frustrating, and I find following through on the tasks of getting a plumber, or is it a plumber job, or is it a builder job, or what on earth is this? Is this the heating, or is this the shower leaking, or what on earth is going on? Was there something else going on? Those type of iterative tasks, I call them boomerang tasks, because they keep on coming back to you. You have to keep on doing steps, and then it comes back to you again, and you have to do another step. They just sometimes that's an area where I have to grow myself up more still, because sometimes I just want to massively avoid them, basically. But I couldn't avoid this, obviously. So I took my kids to school, and I came home, and I had clients later that morning. And then by the grace of God, there was a plumber near where we live, and he came to look at it. And we haven't actually fixed this issue yet, but we're going to be resolving it as a kind of what we did find out. Later that day, my girls had to have freezing cold showers, because it turned out there was actually no heating and no hot water after this happened. But then I discovered that we had an immersion heater, which means that the electricity can heat up the water in your water tank. And I think that because I grew up in South Africa and we never had heating, we didn't even have windows that sealed. I'd never heard of double glazed windows before I got here to London, to England. We just have houses which are drafty and, I don't know, heaters or something. But so I don't know the ins and outs of central heating particularly well, or how the systems work. I've often thought I'd love to be I'd love to do a course as a plumber or as a heating engineer, so I could know exactly what was going on, because I find it kind of frustrating. And I don't like it if I'm feeling like the wool is being pulled over my eyes. But anyway, so my girls had this freezing shower. And then I had looked where the water tank was, and I saw that there was a switch that was off. So I sort of randomly switched it on, and that was actually the immersion heater. So then we've had hot water ever since, but the issue is going to be fixed in a couple of weeks, and we're going to do some other things. We're going to redo a bathroom. So anyway, but I just was I had to push some things off my plan that week, because I had to kind of hold it together with the solo parenting and doing all the stuff. And I just could not kind of muster recording the podcast. So anyway, I'm back now, and I'm delighted to be back with you. Thank you for being here to listen. And today, I'm going to talk to you about 2 reader questions. Yeah, and then there's an episode on trauma, which I think is episode number 14, which I was actually planning to redo for you, I think it's episode 14. Yeah, so episode number 14, which is called Trauma, Understanding the Impact of Childhood Trauma and Research. I'm going to redo that with more stuff about the body and our somatic experience. But now I'm going to read you some reader questions around grappling with things in adult love relationships, and then something else about trauma. And I told you about episode 14 because it relates to the first query. So the first query is very short, so there's not kind of much for me to kind of get my teeth into. So thank you so much to the person who sent this. She said, "Hi, Cath. I found your podcast and love it. I have a question about attachment. I have no bad memories really from my childhood and don't remember not feeling secure, but am now dismissive avoidant. Is it possible for this to be triggered by a big life experience? I have 3 between 11 and 21 I can think of that probably changed me and could be causing some ongoing problems for me." So that's it. It's just those kind of 2 lines. So often if we don't have memories, it's because we maybe had to dissociate. And memories get laid down. Memories depend on us not being too stressed, because if our system is pumping out a lot of cortisol and adrenaline, we don't tend to lay down memories in the place that they would normally get laid down. And what typically happens with memories is they get laid down with a timeline of things that happened, and then we can remember it sequentially. But with trauma, we remember fragments of things and a lot of often disconnected sensory memories. So that might, but you've said bad memories, so I don't know if that you have lots of good memories. I'm not really sure about that. And you don't remember not feeling secure. That's not necessarily, we don't, it's not that we don't remember not feeling secure. It's more that how do we behave in relationships? How do we behave in all relationships? Do we go into relationships where we try really hard to get other people to like us? Or do we go into groups and hope desperately to be seen by everyone in the group and that people won't understand us? Because that could indicate that we're taking a lot of our own longing and projecting that onto a group, and that can be really common. So I will probably need a bit more detail, but the question I guess that I can answer is it possible for issues with attachment essentially to be triggered by a big life experience? Yes, that is absolutely, absolutely possible. We are a child until we're at least 18. Those are very formative years. Our prefrontal cortex only is fully developed by the time we're about 25. And ruptures to our sense of safety and our sense of security can be very impactful in terms of how we learn to attach. The impact of how trauma lands with us is a lot to do with our existing nervous system, our resources, our support system, and any other protective and compensatory factors. So if we have a really loving community, a loving family, a lot of people around us who really want to talk to us and who kind of check in on us a lot, then and we can speak freely about things, then it may be that trauma impacts us less, because trauma is not the event. It's what happens in our system after the event. So it's if we have something happen to us and then forevermore we shallow breathe and we've got a lot of bracing patterns in our body, those the patterns of being very tense and holding ourselves tense in defense against that, that's the legacy of the trauma. And relationally, we have patterns that also show up. So if we feel really content with ourselves, confident in our ability to make friends and get new boyfriends or partners or lovers or whatever, if we're looking for a love relationship, we would be more demonstrating patterns of secure attachment, because we have a confidence that things are good, that people are going to find us and want to be in relationship with us. Whereas if we're going around desperately trying to get everyone to like us, or we always have to be the center of attention, or we have to take on board dealing with all the problems in a group or in a work setting, that points to the fact that relationally we're trying to kind of redo things from our childhood, so that if someone likes us in the present moment, it might redo that past pain. Does that make sense? So if we say we go into a school setting and we have to volunteer to be like the class mother or the, I don't know, whatever. Sometimes people have like the volunteer or the rep, the class rep or something. Yeah, the class rep. And if we have to take on board that all the time and be always dealing with all the problems and always trying to be everyone's confidant and everyone's kind of best friend, what are we hoping to achieve with that? What need is that fulfilling for us? And sometimes that's about control, and often it's about being insecurely attached, and needing to kind of try and make ourselves the center of attention and needing to try and make people like us by delivering value, because possibly in our family of origin, we had to really tend to everyone around us. So we go into groups and we think that we need to be the caretaker for everyone. And I'm massively simplifying this, but so what I would suggest this person does is have a look at the relational patterns, and those are typically based on what's happened. And it could be a big life experience that's not something that's happened in your family. Yes, absolutely. But something that's happened when you're a child will still be considered childhood trauma. It doesn't have to be within the context of the family. And you're welcome to write back with more detail if you want more kind of information. Okay. I'm sorry, I can't get more stuck into that. There's not sort of much for me to go on. Okay, the next one from a listener. Hi, Cath. I think your podcast is so wonderful. Thank you so much. I've learned so much about growing myself up. Would it be possible to do an episode about managing partner relationships whilst growing myself up? I'm in therapy and have been for years. I'm the sort of person who wants to tell those in my inner circle about every thought and feeling. My inner circle is now only my husband after losing my mother 2 years ago. But every time I want to talk about my feelings, we end up arguing. I don't get the closeness I hoped for, and it feels more damaging than healing. My husband is a lovely, sensitive, and caring man. He has a lot of patience, but doesn't really want to talk feelings. I'm worried that my bids for connection aren't getting what either of us need. I had a very repressed childhood, a mum who did everything for us and never really stood up to my almost alcoholic dad. Felt emotionally disconnected at home. I would love for an episode that somehow explained what I'm going through for my husband. I think I seek his understanding as I'm going through perimenopause and had a very traumatic postnatal period with my now 9-year-old son. I'm sorry if this is rambling, but that's how my brain seems to mostly work. Thanks again for all you do. Okay, so please don't apologize. I don't think it's rambling. I love everything that everyone sends to me. And I appreciate the detail in this question. And it's a really honor when people send me things, just an honor at all. So thank you to everyone who sends something. First of all, I want to say, of course, you want to feel seen and heard. We all want to feel seen and heard. That's like a profound, profound human need. And when we haven't got that in childhood and when we're a baby, we have an even bigger need. We carry that around with us. It's in 12 steps, they call it a hole in the soul. And we do really have that hole in the soul where we desperately, desperately want to be seen and understood and met. And it can be really, really painful because we take that with us everywhere, hoping that people will meet us. And it's not often that we do get that meeting. Hopefully we really get it in therapy, but often it's, from a reparenting point of view, that need, we have to really love and nurture and kind of tenderly be with ourselves. So that's the first thing I would say. It makes so much sense that we have such a longing. And I recognize myself in this. So, I really want to kind of normalize this. Of course, we want to feel profoundly seen and heard. It makes a lot of sense. And when we haven't received enough mirroring as a child, so when we have not had our needs met, we carry this around. And it's like a real painful kind of wound and a longing. and we search for people to fill that. And it can be too much for an adult love relationship. It can be that our partner, so what can sometimes happen in relationships is that we hope for our partner to reparent our inner child. And I don't know if that is going on here, but that may be going on here. And that can really put a lot of pressure on things. Now, it is definitely true. So each of us as adults, or as partners, let's say, has we have a community of inner children and we have our adult self. And we will each, in adult love relationships, in marriages, even sometimes in friendships, we will each sometimes parent the other one's inner child. If our partner is very distressed, or if we can see they're really spinning out or losing it, we may do that kind of parenting role for them, and they may do that for us. But ideally, in our adult love relationships, the communication is at the level of adult to adult. And that's how it's most sustainable. So I wonder here if there's any sort of inner child stuff going on. There may be. And okay, so there's many different layers to this. First of all, I want to reference some of Esther Perel's work. When we, and I've had to really I think this is a helpful thing to look at. When we are maybe we don't have a big inner circle, or we really, really carry this longing around, it can be that we want our closest person to really meet us and be able to always hold that for us. And sometimes it's just not possible. They're not capable of that. And that doesn't mean that the relationship is bad. And it doesn't mean the other person is bad. And I'm going to suggest some ways to meet that. I'm also going to say that this can be practiced. So I'm going to share something from my own life around this. So Esther Perel says, and this is from her book called Mating in Captivity, she says, today we turn to one person to provide what an entire village once did, a sense of grounding, meaning, and continuity. At the same time, we expect our committed relationships to be romantic as well as emotionally and sexually fulfilling. Is it any wonder that so many relationships crumble under the weight of it all? And one other thing from Mating in Captivity, which is we're walking contradictions, seeking safety and predictability on one hand and thriving on diversity on the other. If anyone else is listening and they also have this, just ponder to what extent there's too much demand on the one person, so in this case on the husband, and whether there can be some of this met in other places. So they mentioned therapy, this person, so that's great, they've got a therapist. One of the places that you might find what you need in a kind of a gentle way is a 12-step group. So I have mixed feelings about 12-step, and I think that there's a lot that they offer. So particularly for if there's any alcoholism or dysfunctional relationships, there's something called Adult Children of Dysfunctional Families. I think that's ACOA is the name of the fellowship. So ACOA. There's another one called Al-Anon, which is for children and partners of alcoholics. And then there's another one called AOC. Hang on, Adult Children of Alcoholics. There's three different ones. There's ACOA, Al-Anon, and then I'll try and find them, put them in the show notes. But those fellowships are places where people have experienced the same things. So where they've also grown up in families where there's dysfunction, where there's alcoholism, where there's addiction, where there's really a lot of patterns of disconnection. And a meeting takes the format of you go to a meeting and then someone does a chair or a share, so they share about their own family, or they're growing up or whatever they want to talk about. And then the group shares back, and it's all anonymous. So one of the principles of it is that anonymity is highly valued, and they talk about that in the meeting. And what's really wonderful about it is there's such a sense of openness. So you'll go to a meeting, and you hear your own story back to yourself over and over and over again. And it really is a place where you can take a lot of feelings and a lot of the longing and a lot of the grief It's some of the most honest stuff I have ever heard. I spent a long time in a fellowship called CODA, which is Codependence Anonymous. I started going to Al-Anon because I've had an alcoholic father when I was like about 19 or something. I've also done another fellowship. I had a lot of debt, so I went to Debtors Anonymous. I've been to the eating disorders fellowships. There's a lot of, it's free basically. You take you can take money to, they do donations at the end because you have to pay for the rent of the room that the meeting is in and for the tea and coffee and everything that's afterwards. But it's a most amazing community, very boundaried, and there are lots of these meetings all over the place. And that might be a place where you can share every thought and feeling. Every thought and feeling in the context of an adult love relationship may be too much. And I understand why that you may want to do that. So I am much more of a, if I talk about my own marriage and my own relationship, I am much more of a also wanting to share every thought and feeling person. And I have a lot of thoughts and I have a lot of feelings and I have a lot of stringing together of a lot of ideas. And I kind of want to practice my ideas sometimes. And I want to practice them on my husband. And he doesn't want to talk as much as much as I want to talk. And he doesn't, he's not as contact seeking as I am. Although he's got a lot more contact seeking. And he just does not have as many thoughts as I have. I think that's because he's less sensitive. And he doesn't have as many feelings about things, and things seem to impact him less. And that I sometimes used to want to get him to be more like me. And then a therapist of mine said to me, oh my word, what would it be like though if there were two of you in the relationship? And I think that would be kind of exhausting, to be honest. So I kind of saw then that from an energetic perspective, we well matched. And I think that I energize my husband and he kind of calms me a bit. So we sort of fix each other's, it was not fixed, sort of fit well together, but I lift him up a bit and he brings me down a bit. And this might be the case in this person's relationship as well. Also, so we all have different ways of being. We have different levels of sensitivity, and we just have different desires around how much we share and how much we talk. So this person, the husband here, might be a bit more avoidant. My husband is a bit more avoidant. And also I want to speak to this point about emotional neglect. So we don't know about this husband's background at all, but it's likely that there's emotional neglect on both sides here. And where there's been emotional neglect, that's a very common societal pattern. Our emotional landscape is often very flat and it's non-existent. We haven't known that we had an emotional landscape. We haven't known it's okay to talk about feelings. Feelings may be coupled for your husband. Feelings may be very overcoupled with a deep sense of vulnerability or fear or danger. Some people see talking about feelings as like something dangerous because they think it indicates weakness or too much vulnerability, and that feels really threatening often. So we can't go from not being not having a big emotional landscape to suddenly having a big emotional landscape. We have to practice. And that takes time and willingness and many years. It doesn't just happen kind of overnight. So you've said, I would love an episode that somehow explained what I'm going through for my husband. So what I'm understanding is that you have a deep, deep desire to be understood and to be seen. And of course you want him to do that. And he might not be able to do that all the time. So there might be some other options where you can get some of that met, for example, at a 12-step meeting. You might also consider the level of emotional neglect. So I can tell you that so I've been with my husband for nearly 14 years. I think 14 years, yeah. I told him, so 6 months into our relationship, I told him that I loved him. And he didn't tell me he loved me back when I first said that to him. And it took him 6 months, another 6 months, to tell me that he loved me. And I subsequently found out that his family, no one had ever said to him that they loved him before I said it to him. And he had never told anyone that he loved them. So I think probably when I said to him I loved him, because what happened is we were at a friend of mine's birthday. He had come to meet this group of my friends. It was like early on. It was only 6 months into our relationship, and it was like a big deal to meet people. And he had to leave. I think it was like an afternoon tea at like some fancy hotel or something. And he had to leave, and because he was going to go to work early the next morning, and I didn't have to leave early, so he left separately to me. And I told him I loved him just as he was leaving, like as he was going out this revolving door. And then he just walked away. And I was like, oh my God, he's never going to talk, like he's going to break up with me tonight because I said that to him. Like I spun out into all my own stuff. But he didn't say, I don't even think he referred to it. He just phoned me as he did always every night. And at some point in the next 6 months, I had to check in with him. I said to him, I understand that you may not know if you love me, or you might not be able to quite express it yet. And I need to know if we're looking in the same direction. And at that point, he told me that no one had ever said that to him, or that was never something that was said in his family. And he said to me, yes, we were looking in the same direction. So that was enough for me. And also, I could tell from his behavior, he was very consistent, and it was wonderful, the relationship. So I'm sharing this here because can you hear there the massive kind of disconnect in the desire to talk about thoughts and feelings and the actual ability to do it and the level of comfort with it? So you've said here that you don't, you think that he doesn't really want to talk feelings. It might be that he had a totally flat emotional landscape, that he didn't know that he was allowed to have any feelings, that they feel very vulnerable or dangerous or threatening. And that'll be on a somatic level that they would feel like that. So it might be that this person needs to practice, and that you need to give them space and time to practice, and that the depth of the things that you feel might not be able to be held at this point. But that doesn't mean that they won't be able to be held in the future. So I told you something that happened right early on in my relationship. I can see now how my husband is growing. His whole emotional landscape has changed massively, and he's getting much more in touch with his own emotions in many different situations. He's very in touch with his emotions with regards to our children, with regards to me. He's getting much more in touch with his own needs. He's much more aware of stuff with his own parents and his own family relationships. But that has grown over many years. And I still turn up as me with all my stuff and my things, but I don't kind of, no, I do share a lot of vulnerability actually, but I have taught him, I have taught him some of the things that might help me. So, sometimes when I really complain about motherhood, I've told him that I need him to sort of say that really makes sense, or I can hear how difficult that was. So it might be that you need to, I know this is like kind of couples therapy stuff, but sometimes when we really want someone to help us with something, we have to give them the tools to do that. And adult love relationships and marriages are a fantastic opportunity to each grow ourselves up together. And that doesn't mean that we parent each other's inner children. That means at an adult level, we ask for what we need in ways that the other person can hear, and we keep on asking for what we need in ways that are manageable and moderate, because we can't throw our whole inner child community at the feet of our partner. It's not their role to look after them. It's our role. And part of growing ourselves up, for me, sometimes I do really a really hurt part of me will come up, and I try and I will tell my husband about that. And sometimes it's about grieving in private. And sometimes when he's got more capacity, I can tell him things. But I think that this is something where we have to have 100 1-minute conversations. So instead of trying to have one 100-minute conversation where we try and get really seen and heard, this is something to drop in as we kind of go along, and to acknowledge that we might need to practice. So yeah, it sounds like you feel unseen and unheard, and I wonder if the husband feels seen and heard. And when someone doesn't have their own, because I don't know about what their sort of situation is, but I'm imagining that maybe they haven't had experience with building out their own emotional landscape, with talking about their own feelings. And so it might be very foreign for them to talk about it. And it might be very scary. And it might bring up all sorts of really difficult stuff. And it might feel like there's a right way to do it. And it feels like or maybe it feels like there's a way that you want your best for connection to be met. Is that true? Or are you happy for your partner to just practice at meeting those bits for connection? If you feel he needs some emotional coaching, you could give him some phrases. You could say, I want you to try and understand me. And you can always just say, I'm really trying to learn, and I'm sorry, that sounds really difficult. Like we haven't been given these skills. We don't suddenly just get these skills when we're in an adult long-term relationship. We have to practice these skills, and we have to learn about how to hold each other emotionally. So it takes a lot of time, and we're rewiring away from what kept many of us safe in childhood. So for my own husband's case, I think they just avoided all conversations about feelings, about emotions, about love. I just think that did not enter into anything. So when I came along, I must have been like a real surprise to him, I guess. He did acknowledge quite early on that he knows that there's something from his childhood that had prevented him from meeting someone earlier, because we met quite late when we were both like 36. And so I think that this is really something that can shift and change. So I think when something is non-existent in our childhood, we have to learn about how to communicate about this stuff. And we have to also, I have had to learn to contain myself in my marriage, and contain myself and tend to some of my own parts myself, and then take to my husband what is kind of moderate. There's also a mention here of perimenopause. So in somatic experiencing, there's a term called being uncoupled. So in somatic experiencing, we have this term undercoupling, and it refers to the state where traumatic experiences are dissociated and not unified. So it can hinder emotional processing, where we have parts of experiences split off, and then we have to work to kind of recouple things. So we either uncouple overactive responses, or we kind of recouple things that are underactive, to facilitate healing and kind of unity. And what I've noticed is that so for women, each time we get our period, if there are things that we're not tending to, so things that are undercoupled, where we're not having a kind of a unified reaction, or some of our responses are split off or dissociated, that will burst to the fore when we get our periods. So anything that's undercoupled or uncoupled. And then in perimenopause, anything that have not been dealing with, or patterns that we haven't tended to, or we haven't been looking to after ourselves, where there's been a lot of self-abandonment, that all bursts into kind of awareness in perimenopause. So it might be, I wonder if this listener, if anything that was not dealt with from the traumatic postnatal period from 9 years ago might be bursting forth because of perimenopause. So perimenopause is a time when everything that's uncoupled and undealt with will come up. And so that would indicate that there's a need to look at all of those things. And I know that there's a therapist. I hope the therapist, that the therapist is helpful and there's good work, somatic experience and can help with that. And something body-based to maybe help with processing what went around the postnatal period. So craniosacral therapy could be really helpful. Neuroaffective touch could be really helpful. Transforming touch. So Stephen Terrell, the creator of Transforming Touch, has been on the podcast. He's really wonderful. That could be an option. All of those can be really helpful to help with anything that's uncoupled or that needs to be processed. And perimenopause is a huge time of shift and change, and matrescence, which would have come after this postnatal period, might have kind of gone right into, often when I don't know how old this listener is, but, I feel like perimenopause, matrescence, and postpartum have all kind of been like a massive soup for me in a way because of my age. And so that might be the case here. So such gentleness and maybe the need for more support, more type of therapy, more body-based things to process through all of this. And the seeking of the understanding, it might be that more support in the form of like women's circles. I mentioned the 12-step group, so that there can be more holding for that longing and the desire to want to tell all about our thought and feeling. What's really most important, what I have really learned and what I continue to see over and over, is that when we've had trauma, we most need to return to ourselves and to see our own patterns and our own pain, and for ourselves to witness our thoughts and feelings so lovingly. And Stephen Terrell talks about this. He says that with developmental trauma, the greatest rupture is the rupture with self. And so we have to kind of relocate ourselves in our own body and honor ourselves and notice our own emotional landscape and notice, like, really honoring our own thoughts and feelings and our own emotional landscape and the growth of that. And we have to really love ourselves unconditionally. No other adult can actually really love ourselves unconditionally. Only we are the ones who know what our inner children need. Okay, I hope to both dear listeners who've written in, I hope that this has given you something to think about. And thanks for listening. And I'll be back next week. And I hope that you're all well.